short several times. The oil in Copper Canyon Daisy, if you get it on your skin, it's like standing in a mound of fire ants for a few minutes. That stuff is absolutely horrible as far as your skin. If you're growing Copper Canyon Daisy, I love it because the deer don't eat it. Its disadvantages is it does not bloom until fairly late fall. Now, if we have a mild winter, it'll bloom again in the spring. But it has a much shorter bloom time than that Damianita, and it's not real pleasant on the skin if you get it on you. I'll just leave it at that. Yes, sir.
A corner lot in the neighborhood where you got lots of little kids running around through your yard.
Oh, yeah.
It's a wonderful plant. You always know which ones are cutting through your yard because they smell real good.
And some of them have
Unlike
big
stuff with
blisters.
thorns, their parents may object to the thorns.
Yeah. Yes.
I just bought my first jasmine plant, kind of looks like that one, a couple of weeks ago. How do I keep it?
It'll grow almost anywhere, but the more sun you put it in, the more likely it is to turn into, like our fence out there, just solid
And
flowers.
fertilize it and...
Yeah, just like you would any
All
other
right,
plant.
thank you.
Certainly. Other things that I think are great in sunny landscapes. Another neat native flower, Gaura, G-A-U-R-A, one of the plants that was originally described by Friedrich Lindheimer, the early German botanist in this area, or naturalist I should say. He was much more than just a botanist. But this is Gaura lindheimeri. It has been hybridized. It used to be, or if you look at the ones growing out in the hill country, they'll usually be this kind of, they open pink and then turn white. But there are varieties of Gaura now that have highly colored pink foliage and varieties that have very deep red-pink flowers. The Japanese have done the same thing they've done with so many of our plants. They've taken our native plants and hybridized them, and I won't say necessarily improve them, but very drastically increase the number of colors and varieties. The Texas bluebells, if anybody's ever seen Texas bluebells growing in the wild, they're absolutely gorgeous. Botanically, they're either called Lysianthus or Eustoma, but if you saw the hybrid bluebells, you wouldn't even think they were related. The Japanese variations on that are pink and deep blue and purple and multicolored flowers. And the same things happen. You'll see Siski pink, Siski white are some of the different varieties, but Gaura, in my garden, it's not super long lived. Usually lives about 3 years, and then I end up replacing it. But if you want something that loves the sun and gives you lots and lots of flowers, the Gaura is a real good plant to choose. Now, one plant that we didn't bring back here, but something that I will mention for full sun, even though we talked about it in partial shade, and that is the new darker blue plumbago. As you leave today, even if you're parked out front, go through the parking lot and look at the batch of it that's planted toward the front and against the far wall. You know, it used to be plumbago was the only form you saw was either white or a very light sky blue. And in the right place, they're very pretty. But the variety that is available now, it's almost as blue as your shirt. And you will see that as you go out. And the more sun you have that in, if you have it in good soil, if you work some compost in, planted it in decent soil, that plant will be in bloom 10 months out of the year, and it's absolutely spectacular. It's one of those ones that's going to grow up about waist high, unless you have it supported by something. At one point, before we turned that big standard yopon into more of a tree, when it was like a big bush, there was a plumbago planted at the base of it, and it had grown up through the plant, and there were flowers 10 feet up in the air. So how tall does plumbago get? I don't know, it'd get 10 feet tall. Nobody would believe you, but if it had just been left out in the open like that, it probably would top out at about 3.5 or 4 feet.
Does that need to be fertilized?
All plants need to be fertilized. It's like saying, do I need to feed my dog? Yeah. Some dogs may take more than others, but if you want your plants to really thrive, yeah, good nutrition is very important.
There's a plants I've seen sold as plumbago that it's a real low-growing ground cover that spreads out a lot.
No, that is sold as dwarf plumbago,
Yeah.
and it's not a plumbago at all. The flowers kind of look like plumbago. Its name is Ceratostigma plumbagioides, which means looks like plumbago, but it's not related. It is an outstanding ground cover. It's an outstanding ground cover for sun as well as for shade. Has a deep cobalt blue, even bluer than that upright plumbago, but that's not a plumbago, it's Ceratostigma.
Well, I found you don't plant it unless you want it to spread out.
That's true.
It loves to reseed. It's like columbine.
Well, it's not really reseeding. It's putting out underground runners.
Okay.
In fact, when I go out and buy at the growers, when I go out and pick this stuff, if it's been sitting in the spot more than 6 weeks, it's growing out the bottom of the pot as well as out the top of the pot. Wonderful plant. It does freeze in the winter. It freezes all the way to the ground, but it's very cold hardy. It's come back even after very, very cold winters. Has beautiful orange-red foliage before it freezes back in the winter. It just blooms all the time. It's just a neat, neat plant. Yes, sir.
Is the Gara deer resistant?
Deer resistant, yes. Deer proof, no. On my ranch, out in the fields, I rarely see it in bloom. But if I put up a little exclusion zone, if I take a chunk of wire so tall and make a little round circle and set it down over a given spot in the pasture, usually within a few weeks I'll see Gara up and in bloom in that. It's just the deer couldn't get to it, so it's had a chance to grow out. Yes?
How tall does it get?
About as tall as you see right there, maybe 6 inches taller than that.
And why?
It's just an ever-expanding clump, probably to about 2.5 feet.
Okay.
Yes?
Will you talk about the different colors, different varieties of Esperanza? I noticed they had like red and yellow.
The Esperanza now is usually either yellow or orange.
Sorry, echinacea.
What now?
Echinacea.
Oh, the echinacea, absolutely. Coneflowers. The original coneflower in the common name is purple coneflower, and it was always purple. Now, the next one that came out was a white form. Then all of a sudden we started seeing variations in the color of purple, and they range from light lavender to a really deep, intense purple. In the past 3 years, we're seeing new hybrids that may be yellow or orange or almost red. My experience so far has been that the purple form comes back very dependably year after year. The yellows and oranges and salmons, maybe yes, maybe no. So I would plant the brighter colors of echinacea, of coneflower. I'd plant them and consider them annuals, and if they come back, be happy with it. But I won't count on them coming back. But on the other hand, the color is so spectacular, I recommend planting them anyway. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, Bob. We have a passion flower and mandevilla that we fed with the color essentials. And you had mentioned a while ago to mix it with the
Medina?
Medina, yes, sir. And if you constantly do that, you wouldn't have to change it, right?
Right.
You could just mix it
That's
that
correct.
way. Like, should you disturb the soil on top when you feed them a little bit, or just put it on top?
Just put it on top. And if you're going to mulch, put the fertilizer down first, put the mulch on top of the fertilizer. But you can just, I don't work it in. I just go out and sprinkle and water. And
well, it's been magnificent on our mandevilla. It's just so full of bloom, we just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Looking just really great.
And if you've not seen some of the newer varieties of passion vine, again, walk out and look to the right just before you go out the gate. Our incense passion vine is starting to bloom, and anybody who's never seen good passion vine in bloom, and you know me, I'm an orchid grower, and I think orchids are the most unique flowers in the world, but there's no orchid that begins to compare to the intricacy of a passion flower bloom. And anybody who's seen it knows what I'm talking about. If not, take a look at it on your way out, and if you don't mind bending over, take a whiff. A little later it'll be all the way up in the trees. But if you've not smelled that incense variety, has an incredibly sweet fragrance as well as a really unique and beautiful flower. Yes?
The ratio of the granular to the color essentials, is that the 1 to 2? Or?
Somewhere given in the neighborhood of half and half. But again, with organics, nice thing about organics, you don't have to measure. If I'm mixing them up, I'll just put a handful of this and a handful of that. Sometimes a little more of it gets spilled if Hannah's out helping me. The ratio of my black lab, if you don't know Hannah, when she helps, the ratios get really mixed up sometimes, but it's not critical. Okay, just a few other things that I want to be sure that we cover, because I don't want to keep you here all day. Potato vine. Pretty plant, and the two colors that I like even better, the one that's kind of a chartreuse green, and then there is one that is tricolor, that's sort of white and gray and pink and a little bit of green in it. Looks like a wimpy grower. Most plants that look like that, you'd look at it and you think, man, I'm going to have to baby that thing just to keep it alive. That plant is incredible. We saw it up at the Dallas Botanical Gardens 1 or 2 years ago, and it's growing out in full hot sun. It's covered an area that's big as this whole room and just absolutely growing like a weed. Last year we put some of it in those pots that we have out there on the west side of the building. Bright, hot west afternoon sun, it just thrives. So that plant is one that really, its looks are definitely not what its personality is. It is a lot hardier and tougher. That green, chartreuse green, is such a striking color, and it also will grow in the hot sun. We saw that in Atlanta, I guess 2 years ago was the first time we saw it growing in full sun, and they had planted it in combination